Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. This is the sped up version of a solar install on my car. So the first thing you want to do is you want to find a solar panel. So the solar panel I chose was Allpower's 100-watt solar panel. So the first thing you got to do is you got to inspect the solar panel and then take off the plastic. Once the plastic is removed, you're going to want to check to make sure that this panel is producing the amount of electricity that it stated it would online. So I looked in the manual to see how much it would actually produce, and then I found a charge controller which was able to handle the load, so it will only output 14.2 volts. The next thing I did was I connected it to a voltmeter, and I was getting 20 volts off the panel, so this will be plenty to charge up my car battery. The next thing I did was I had to find a mounting location on my vehicle. I decided that underneath the roof rack would be a perfect location and it would be very hidden and nobody can see it from the ground. The next thing I did was I measured from side to side to make sure that the panel was centered. Once that was complete and I knew where I wanted to put my panel, I tapped screws into each hole for the solar panel. To do this, I used a screw and then I added a washer to hold the panel back in place really well. So the screw was slightly too small to hold the panel because the panel's holes were bigger than what the screw head was. So to do this, I'm going to use a washer in between the screw and the solar panel. So I dabbed each screw in a little bit of grease so that way it doesn't rust too much. You can see the washer on the screw right there. And when putting in the screws, we did it by hand just to make sure we didn't strip anything and we didn't put it in too tightly. So this is just a sped up version of showing you what each hole looked like. It was the same process for all of them. Just be careful where you're screwing on the top of your vehicle. If it feels like there's not too much stuff underneath, you have to be careful that you don't go through into the headliner. So we were lucky and we didn't go through all the way because we measured and made sure that our screws were thinner than our thickness of our roof. So when going through, you want to make sure that you clean the dust from underneath of the panel. This can scratch the paint underneath and you don't want to have your paint peeling or coming off underneath the solar panel because that might cause rust. So each time I put in a new screw, I put a little bit of extra grease because we did put a hole in the roof and I don't want the hole to expand and become bigger over time. So this was a main concern for me, but to make sure that nothing would happen, I'm going to caulking around the solar panel after I finish the installation of all the screws. So since the screws were going pretty well, the only screws that didn't want to stay in were the screws at the very back, and this was because the metal was slightly thinner. So what we did to fix this issue is we used a bigger screw. To hold the wires in place so that they weren't flapping in the wind, we mounted the wires with a little bracket from Princess Auto through the screw and to the back of the solar panel. The next spot where we mounted the wire was to the side of the roof rack. This was a perfect location because it would hold the wire off the roof, but not too high and not too low. You don't want the wire to rub on the roof because that can take off the paint or it could ruin the wire. This is a very snug location and the wire wasn't moving at all in this location. So after that was installed, we had to figure out how we get the wire into the car and connect it to the battery. So something special that I added to my car a while back is I added two lines from the battery to the back, a hot side and a not hot side, so I could have extra blinker lights. So we're going to tie into this system to connect the battery to the solar panel. So between the battery and the solar panel, we're going to have our charge controller. So just make sure when you're setting this all up, you know which side is which, and you test each connection before you connect it all together to the battery. So how we got the solar panel wire to come through into the car is I drilled a hole behind the seal and then I pushed the wire through that hole. So just make sure that the hole is big enough that it won't cut the cable and it's not too small. So once I had the hole, I pulled the wire through snugly and you could see it was a perfect fitment. So this will be hidden by the plastic panels that go on top of the covering for the edges. So you can see our charge controller there. So what I'm doing now is we're actually adding 2 wires because the solar panel wire was pretty thick. So we're having 2 wires come from the solar panel to the charge controller to make sure that we have a good gauge of wire and we're not overheating our thin wire that we had. So having 2 wires increases the capacity of the panel's power output to the charge controller. So in this scene, you can just see we're finishing up some final touches, attaching the charge controller to the battery. Once this was installed, we had to test to make sure that the panel would actually produce some power. Unfortunately, it was nighttime when we finally had everything hooked up, but what was very interesting was that the panel, you could see here in this clip right here, was actually charging off the lights in the garage. It wasn't actually charging, it was just ready to charge, and this was telling us that our charge controller was working and that the panel was ready. When the sun hit it, it would charge up immediately. So if you like this content, press like, comment, subscribe. Let me know how it's going. All right, thanks for watching.